Hey guys, Watery48 here. Sleeping Dogs is a tragic story, and no, I'm not necessarily talking about the game story itself. I'm talking about its development story, and quite frankly, I don't think it's a story many people know about, or at least I didn't before researching for this video. At the beginning of Sleeping Dogs' development cycle, it went by the temporary name Black Lotus and was being developed by United Front Games and published by Activision. From the beginning, the game had a clear vision of being a Hong Kong action cinema inspired open world game, but the release of GTA 4 made the higher ups at Activision want the game to be a competitor. After the release of GTA 4, Activision became more hands-on to the point of directly interfering with United Front's vision of the game. Design director Mike Scooper commented on this, saying that at one point he was told the game had to have everything GTA 4 had, and even at one point was told to make the game like the Rush Hour movies with a more comedic tone. The only issue with this was that they were already very far into development with a very serious tone to the story. Around this time, Activision started to get cold feet about making Black Lotus a brand new IP, and decided to make it a new entry in the True Crime series for recognizability, and from that point on, the game would be called True Crime Hong Kong. This decision was somewhat baffling, but also made sense at the same time. It was baffling because the last True Crime game did not review particularly well, but the game's core pillars were driving, shooting, and melee combat, which were the same three core pillars that Black Lotus was going for. Because of these similarities and there being no need to change the story for it to fit into the True Crime franchise, the people at United Front didn't mind this name change. The game would then go on to be announced to the public as True Crime Hong Kong and was initially set to release in 2009, but got pushed back to 2010 and then 2011. The reason for these pushbacks were because the devs were having issue with buggy code, especially during animations. Producer Dan Sochin would comment on this, saying that they would come in some days and fighting animations would be completely bugged and people were T-posing, and would find the cause of this issue would be because someone added 2 frames to a facial animation in a cutscene. Now, I'm not a game developer, but I don't need to be to see how annoying and time-consuming fixing these constant bugs would be. Because of these constant bugs and setbacks, Activision cancelled the game due to quality concerns, which is funny considering the AI slop that Call of Duty pushes out today. At the 11th hour, Square Enix swooped in and bought the publishing rights to True Crime Hong Kong and allowed United Front to continue working on the game. And I'm not using that 11th hour term in an overdramatic way. United Front were an independent developer, meaning that without a publisher they were essentially out of a job and had to make 100 of their 200-person team redundant just to keep the company afloat. Square Enix also decided that they didn't want the game to be a true crime sequel anymore, which is how we eventually got the name Sleeping Dogs. Working under Square Enix was a lot better for United Front, as they weren't constantly up United Front's ass about making the game a GTA 4 clone like Activision was. Eventually, the game would release in 2012 and sold around 1.75 million copies, which is amazing for a new IP, but Square Enix considered it a failure because it didn't meet expectations. 2 years later, in 2014, Sleeping Dogs Definitive Edition would be released and marketed as a remaster. A lot of people would complain about this remastered version as it was somewhat lackluster and the original game was only 2 years old. Sound familiar? But anyway, that's really it for the development of the game. Let's dive into the story. Hey guys, Editing Watery here. I just came to say that I must have been in a K-hole when writing my story section, because I completely butcher how this game's story begins and the order of some events later in the story. What I've written gives you the gist of the story, but some scenes I describe do not play out in-game the way I describe it. I'm also too lazy to re-record it, and it's only the beginning of the game's story that I get completely wrong. Anyway, back to the video. At the beginning of the game, we play out a mission as the main character Wei Shen, running from and eventually being arrested by the police during a drug deal gone wrong. Wei is then interrogated by Officer Jane Teng. Midway through the interrogation, Superintendent Thomas Pendrew and Chief Inspector Raymond Mack come into the room and order Teng to stop the interrogation and inform her that Wei is an undercover cop. This is also where it is explained to us that Wei's mission is to infiltrate the triad organization called the Sung On Yi. Wei meets his childhood friend Jackie Ma, who was a member of the Sung On Yi, in a holding cell which he uses to infiltrate the triads. Jackie quickly introduces Wei to his higher-up Winston Chu. Winston holds the rank of Red Pole, which means he's essentially a commander of a large group of the triads, but is not at the very top. Winston sends Wei on various missions which Wei completes with ease. This makes Wei rise through the ranks very quickly. Whilst Wei is doing these missions with the triads, he is also helping Officer Tang with some cases and informing his handler Raymond of triad activities. It is also revealed around this time that the Triads are in the midst of a civil war, with Winston's group actively fighting two other Red Poles named Dog Eyes and Big Smile Lee, whilst also having some minor run-ins with a completely separate gang called the 18K. On one of Wei's missions with Teng, he gets a drug dealer called Popstar arrested. This raises the alarm that Wei is an undercover, and Winston almost kills Wei, but Wei manages to convince Winston that this guy, whose name I forgot, is actually an informant, and they kill him instead. Fast forward a bit and we see that Wei is starting to feel conflicted about his commitments to being a cop and his newfound family in the Sung-On Yi. There are two main events around this time that make Wei either start to become disenfranchised with the police force or strengthen his feelings towards the gang and its members. The first one being helping Pendry implicate a Triad member in a murder that he didn't commit. This makes Wei start to obviously distrust Pendry and start arguments with both Pendry and Raymond. The second event being the shooting of Winston's wedding, resulting in the death of both Winston and his fiancée. The wedding shootout also leads to the leader of the Triads known as Uncle Po to be shot and injured. Wei helps to save Uncle Po, which leads to a friendship forming between them. With Winston's death, Wei rises to the rank of Red Pole. It is also becoming clear that Uncle Po was too injured to lead the Triads. This leads to his nephew being given the temporary role as leader. This is where another Red Pole named Broken Nose Jiang approaches Wei and says that if Uncle Po dies, it is clear his nephew is unfit and incompetent to lead, and fears that Big Smile Lee and Dog Eyes will make a move to become the leaders of the gang. Wei agrees to help her, but not long after this, Raymond and Pendry tell Wei his mission is complete due to the Sung-On Yi being severely crippled. Wei argues this decision, saying that if he leaves now, Dog Eyes and Big Smile Lee will take over, making the gang more violent than it already was. I'm going to fast forward a bit again because this story section is going on way too long in my opinion. Basically, you find out it was Pendry that killed Uncle Po to accelerate the infighting in the Triads in the hopes they'd take themselves out. You killed Dog Eyes and Big Smile Lee, making Jiang the Triad leader. Jiang gives you the evidence of Pendry being corrupt, and the game ends with you saying some final goodbyes to Teng and the revelation that Jiang knows you're a cop, but due to you being helpful to her, she decides to leave you alive. This ending does leave the game open for a sequel, which I will talk about later, and no, I don't believe we're going to get one. This story is amazing, and I believe the game deserves a playthrough for the story alone. Honestly, some of the most memorable parts of this game aren't the missions, but characters just talking to each other. Before going on to the gameplay, this game has two story-driven DLCs that I want to quickly go over. The first DLC being Nightmare in North Point. This DLC essentially is the undead nightmare of this game, but instead of zombies, this DLC has the Jinn from Chinese folklore. This story basically breaks down to some ex-Triad's angry spirit coming back from the dead to get revenge and unleashing the Jinn into the city. This story is nowhere near as deep as the base games, but it does take a comedic approach and is only about 30 to 40 minutes long, so I'd say it's worth a playthrough. The second DLC is called The Year of the Snake. Again, this DLC story is nowhere near as in-depth as the base games. You play as Wei, but he's no longer undercover and working as a normal cop. There's a cult that is performing terrorist attacks throughout the city and you are trying to stop them. That concept may sound interesting, but the way it's presented here is honestly boring. The mission structure is also very repetitive and the DLC drags on for way longer than it needs to be. I wouldn't recommend playing this one unless you really enjoy the core gameplay of the base game and don't really care about the lackluster story. Now we are finally on to talking about the gameplay. Like I mentioned earlier, this game has three core pillars: melee combat, shooting, and driving, and all of these things are great. The melee combat is almost identical to the Batman Arkham games, which is no surprise as apparently some of the team members at United Front did help make those games. The difference between the Arkham games combat and Sleeping Dogs is that you aren't Batman. You're essentially just a normal fella who knows Kung Fu. This means that the Sleeping Dogs melee combat is a lot more grounded and realistic. You aren't going to be doing flips over enemies or throwing smoke bombs, but the combat is still really fun. The other side of the combat is the shooting. There's not really much I can say here other than it's your typical cover-based shooting system. Guns feel satisfying to use and they sound big and punchy. The only complaint I have is that if you use a controller on the PC port for this game, you can't change your camera sensitivity and the default sensitivity is far too low, which can make the aiming feel sluggish. So quite often when I'd have to use guns, I just switch to the mouse and keyboard. I have even less to say about the driving. Much like everything else in this game, it works well and I had no issues with it. If you've played GTA before, then you know exactly how the driving works in this game. The only big issues I have with the gameplay are the repetitive mission structure and very repetitive side activities. The main missions I have issues with are the ones where you help Officer Teng, as these missions are mostly just side activities you can do in the open world but presented to you as main missions. The other main missions involving the gang do have some repetitiveness to them, but are nowhere near as bad as Teng's missions. Teng's missions don't really contribute to the overall plot of the game either, but are required to do to get other main missions to appear. Much like Teng's missions, the side activities are also very repetitive. Once you've done each type 5 to 6 times, you've seen every possible scenario in the game. I also want to briefly mention here that this game does have some weird bugs. None of these bugs are game breaking, they're more goofy and they're not excessive to the point of being annoying. The main ones you can find are motorcycles being driven on their own, random burning bodies falling from the sky, random cars exploding out of nowhere, fuck do the cars keep exploding randomly? And civilian car AI braking, causing them to just block off streets and sit still in their car. And also sometimes you or a random object near you will just get flung in the air. These bugs happen often enough where you will encounter them multiple times, but they never really upset the flow of the game or the story. They're more funny than annoying. In conclusion, Sleeping Dogs is an amazing game, and despite some minor bugs and repetitive missions, is definitely worth a playthrough if you haven't played it already. Before I end this video, I did mention earlier that I don't think we will ever get a sequel. Well, what if I told you that at one point we were actually very close to getting a sequel slash side game called Triad Wars? Triad Wars was meant to be an MMORPG with a story that acted as a continuation from Wei Shen's, but wouldn't feature him as a playable character. It's actually kind of hard to find info about this game, and the information I did find about the game said that this game made it all the way to the beta stage and even had a Steam open beta for a short time. During this short time, the game got a lot of bad reviews due to the game becoming an MMORPG, and these reviews caused Square Enix to cancel the project. Because United Front Games was still an independent developer, this left them without a job and they started pitching new ideas to other publishers. This led the company to becoming a support studio for other developers for money, and most of the games they pitched never got picked up by a publisher, and the one that did eventually got cancelled. This eventually would lead to the closure of United Front Games. So yeah, we probably aren't getting a sequel, but Square Enix still has the publishing rights, so there is a chance that another studio could develop it. Anyway, that's it for today's video. I have a Twitch now, so go follow that if you want to catch me live. Bye.